Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Radiohead, In Rainbows. Radiohead, does this band even need an introduction at this point? Legendary English rock band, critical darlings releasing expansive and genre-defying albums from the 90s to the 2000s. And yet, I'll be honest, I'm a pretty heavy virgin when it comes to Radiohead. I know some of their songs, of course, some of the bigger, more recognizable hits from OK Computer and Kid A, and of course I've heard Creep countless times, but in terms of full-length projects, I've never really dipped my toes into that. Radiohead, at least for me, defines a genre that I've coined as criticcore. Music that is absolutely loved by critics, and maybe the general consensus as well, but predominantly critics and big companies like Rolling Stones and all that. Other artists that I believe fit into this label are artists like Fiona Apple, Swans, Run the Jewels, Death Grips, Frank Ocean, and Kendrick. A whole plethora of bands and artists from a multitude of genres. Criticcore to me isn't necessarily a negative label, but a lot of it is music I'm not too eager to visit, and I think a big reason why is that I'm a pop listener. Pop music is the stuff I grew up on, and like 80% of that music in criticcore doesn't really have a pop formula usually. So that's kind of why you don't hear me talking about those artists too much, even though rave reviews are piling in. However, I'm not one to turn down a request, and I'm not gonna lie, I've been kind of excited to dive into this album ever since I got the request, that being Radiohead's 7th album, and one of their most treasured, In Rainbows, released in 2007. I've heard from a few colleagues that In Rainbows is apparently one of the best places to start with Radiohead's music, so that only really built the excitement for me. But anyway, I've talked enough, let's just dive right in. What are my thoughts on In Rainbows? Let's find out as I review it, track by track. Since there were no pre-release singles, we will just start at the top of the track list, with that being 15 Step, which had me hooked pretty early thanks to the frenetic 5/4 percussion that holds as the main centerpiece instrumentally, being backed up by some optimistic synths, a timid yet warm riff, and an amazing bass line from Colin. A very memorable and bopping opener, even if that initial catchiness gets a bit diluted from the halfway point on, but Tom's vocals help to keep the track steady with a delicate quivering tone, but it's not a weak voice at all. You can tell he's still putting some weight into it as he sings about love and the deceitfulness of said love, how the narrator is dealing with anxiety. This love seems to remedy that, but after this partner begins to toy a little bit and cut everything off, he's just right back to where he started. Amazing opening track. Bodysnatchers comes out barreling with its distorted bass, gritty guitar playing, and a very snappy percussion. It's an amazing rocker of a tune, letting this guitar get progressively more abrasive. The bridge has a sweet acoustic vibe to it as the warping of this instrumental builds and builds as it climaxes at the cacophonous outro. So much fire and energy here, easily one of the most headbangable tracks on the album. Tom's vocals go through a journey on this track, following in the instrumental's path, as he starts out pretty tame, gaining a livelier punch for the bridge, and just manically spouting for the final moments of the track, singing about living a fallacious life, and as a result, being miserable because of it. Another amazing song. Nude is an ominously cozy track. The guitar is light and pleasant, the otherworldly synths encircle the mix and provide this ethereal ambience for the track to marinate in, as the trotting pecks of the percussion and grumbling bass keep a steady, fragile groove. The song also has a pretty scant structure overall, but it's stretched out appropriately and doesn't feel bare or unfinished at all, especially with the moments of heavenly cooing that are so surreal and just satisfying to vibe to. Lyrically, the song seems to be about the idea of living in a world with one ideology, one belief, and one colloquial thought process, and the consequences that could follow if someone were to think differently, even for the better. Wonderful song. Weird Fishes / Arpeggi opens up with an enjoyably sticky melody. The percussion is just so easy to engross yourself into. The continuous arpeggios of the guitar are very comforting and mellow, providing Tom's voice the breathing room to really resonate over this mix. But I still think what really sells me on this track is its structure more than anything else, how we seem to be riding this emotional roller coaster in these lyrics. The opening words are pretty depressing, being at a low in terms of self-esteem, and the way he sings it is so crushing. But then he starts to gain a little bit more hope that this seduction could be real as the music builds, crescendoing on this brief instrumental section, but not before reverting back to the same style as the opening, finding a content solace and a general acceptance in failure at rock bottom, but still having the desire and the motivation to try again and escape this pit. Very nice song. All I Need immediately starts off on a high note with this spacious, serene, encapsulating ambience like floating in space, being assisted by some deep, muddy piano, heavy bass, and even more snappy drums. I gotta say, I love Tom's vocals over this song. They're so hypnotizing in their prominence. The melody is tranquil, and I love how the song blossoms for the final leg. The drums turn explosive, the piano keys pierce the mix, leaving Tom's voice in the dust as the band really gets their chance to shine, and deservedly so. Lyrically, our narrator seems to be mourning the inability to be with his love interest, claiming they're all he needs. He's fully devoted to this partner, to which they repay with nothing. Great track. Faust Arp almost comes off like a little bit of an interlude, but at the same time it's still very fleshed out. The acoustic guitar lights up the entire tune as occasional string embellishments make their way in a few times throughout this 2-minute track. The song also has a very unique and slightly jarring vocal melody, using a lot of repetition across these verses that can sometimes throw you off of the original vibe, as Tom's voice almost comes off like rambling, just a stream of consciousness unloaded across the brief runtime. The lyrics, however, seem much more cohesive, being about living through your day-to-day life, but also getting torn and drained and exhausted by the sheer monotony of it all. Yet despite the protagonist's crippling mental state, the world still goes on, and time proceeds like it always has for everyone else. Nice song here too, although not one of my favorites. Reckoner is one of the main songs from this album I've seen get the most praise, and you know, I can't really deny any of it. This is a great song. The percussion takes up a good chunk of the spotlight with its upfront, almost jazzy rhythm along with a light shaker accompaniment. The guitar has a similar arpeggio to Weird Fishes, but this time being much more overshadowed, as the string work all helps to tie the song together in a neat, delicate package. I also really like Tom's pillowy falsetto as he sings these lyrics about mortality, a universal message declaring that life and its values are only temporary, as death strips the soul of such accomplishments, and how this cycle of life, prosperity, and inevitable death is ever flowing like waves on a shore. Love this message, great song. House of Cards features a summary skip in its guitar playing along with very pop-oriented percussion. It's one of the most accessible songs in this album in my opinion, purely based on the instrumental. Of course, that does morph a little bit. The synthwave gradually begins to swallow the mix, leaving the last leg of it to be this moody, transcendental vibe, a very soothing moment as a whole, especially when paired with Tom's vocals that have an appropriate echo behind them as he sings about just wanting to be with this partner who's already in a relationship. It may sound simple, but some very clever analogies help to elevate this track above just another love song. Great track. Jigsaw Falling Into Place was actually a single that was released after the album dropped, and this one's pretty solid. It's another accessible track, and I can see why it was released as a single. I like the trotting of the drum, the bass work is really gripping too, presenting an upbeat and uplifting rock jam that progressively builds up to the powerful chorus being the only one of its kind at the end, all being propelled by Tom's vocals increasing in intensity accordingly. The entire song just feels so natural in its structure, and the performance really has no flaws in my opinion. Lyrically, I'm pretty sure this one is actually just a simple love song about finding a love interest at a bar, they get smashed, they do some dancing, and they just kinda leave and go their separate ways, but wishing maybe something more could sprout out of this interaction. Love this one. And finally, the Closer Videotape is the other track from this album I've heard get so much adoration, and right away on the first note, the tone and melancholia of this piano tells me that the love is absolutely justified. I didn't even need to hear any more of the song. I could have just ended the review right there, but that would be dumb because this song is arguably one of the most emotional and human songs on this album. The way Tom's vocals ooze a gratuitous amount of reassurance and comfort as this narrator sings from beyond the grave, how this videotape is meant to preserve his legacy and his memory here on Earth, how the sporadic drums perfectly introduce themselves and continue to repeat on loop, how the final minute of this song is just a perfect instrumental closer, gradually cutting the instruments off one by one. Honestly, an incredible track. Overall, I did have high expectations going into this critically acclaimed album for the first time. I honestly think they were matched and even shattered. This was truly a miraculous album. Held up by so many for a reason. I love how a lot of the songs are just accessible enough for any fan to get introduced to them, yet have many layers to keep listeners invested. A lot of the mixes on here are gorgeous as well, and the album didn't overstay its welcome in the slightest. A classic for a reason. I'm feeling a 10 on this album. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.